Yeah, thank you. So, as announced, I will talk about Dynamic Media with OpenAPI and focus on the usage of it in AEM and not from outside as it was done by Georg. So, yeah, that's me. I'm around here quite a long time. I'm working with AEM and also a bit with Edge Delivery Services. And I'm also around the Apache Software Foundation, especially the Sling project. This was mentioned far too few this conference, I have to say. Okay. So again, I will start with a quick overview of Dynamic Media with OpenAPI, adding some aspects to this, which Georg already told about, and then have a quick look what's possible with core components currently and what's possible with using the WCMO media handler. So let's start with a quick overview. Just to recap, currently there are 4 ways to generate renditions in AEM or generally handle assets in AEM. The first column is the traditional way from AEM 6.5 on premises, just render the renditions in the JVM, meaning the asset is loaded in memory, then the rendition is rendered and cached in dispatcher. This works, and it still works on AEM as a cloud service. It's even still the default way on AEM cloud service, but for the cloud, it's not longer the recommended way. It's more an anti-pattern because in the cloud, you should not do image processing in the JVM any longer. That's why there's a new way for, I think, 2 years or so called web-optimized image delivery in the cloud. It's available by default. It does not come with additional licensing costs. But if you're using core components, you have to activate it actively in each content policy for the image component. And then you just get an URL pointing to an Edge URL from AEMaaCS Cloud Service. And then you get the same features as the in-memory rendered renditions with simple image manipulation like cropping and width and height and so on. And different resolutions, but rendered on the edge. And this is, of course, far more efficient and also cached on the CDN level. So both options are available for free if you have AEM as a cloud service, but both do not support smart crop, so no AI support here. This comes into the play with Dynamic Media. The classic Dynamic Media already provides this, which is available for 6.5 and AEM as a cloud services. And it supports a huge set of image manipulation and special features and also smart cropping. Smart cropping means if you want have an original image in a different aspect ratio, then you require it, and then you want to crop it to a certain ratio that you get the best possible partition of the image, not just a center cropping. But it's already told by Georg, the Dynamic Media Classic stack is a bit aged, and not all parts have aged well. So I'm very happy that there is this Dynamic Media with OpenAPI thing now available. And it's not just an API layer on top of the classic Dynamic Media. It's really a new implementation how AEM, Author, and Dynamic Media are interacting. And in my point of view, it's a much better and leaner and transparent way to work with it and this nice API on top of it. And we'll have a look at this. So at a very high level view, it works like this. You have AEM Author, where you upload your assets. Simplifying this here, assuming that you have a single site instance managing assets and your pages. Of course, you can separate this in separate AEM instance. But in this case, we have all on one instance. And if you publish a page content, it's, as usual, pushed to the publish instance and then available on your publish server. For assets, you no longer have to publish them to the publish server, but instead you just set one property and status property and set it to approved. And once the asset is set to approved, it's automatically available without any binary copying involved on a new domain delivery and then your program environment name. Of course, you can define a custom domain name here as well, but by default, this is what you get. And so once your set is approved, it's available on this delivery domain and can be, and your assets can be scaled in any rendition, and you have the image manipulation parameters and so on. Here's a short overview of the URL concept, which is used by this API to actually get the assets and renditions. The first line, this original as sample PDF, is example to directly get the original binary, in this case, a PDF download. The important part is the UID, the global unique identifier there, which I've stripped out here. This is really the UID from the asset metadata, which is automatically generated once you upload an asset. And then you have as sample PDFs just for SEO that you have a real file name there as well. The next one is an example to really get a rendition. So you get a sample JPEG image, but with a specified width and a JPEG quality in this example. Of course, there's more possible. In the top row, you see rendition parameters. What are the current available image manipulation parameters? For example, you can add prefer WebP. So if the user agent supports it, it automatically generates a WebP image and not a JPEG image, whatever is your original image. And you have a URL metadata, where you can get metadata of your asset in JSON format. And there's a nice documentation linked below of this API. And this is a look at the metadata. On the left side, you see what you usually see if you look at an asset in your repository. It's also usually metadata generated by AEM automatically. And highlighted is this one important status property. And if this is set to approved, then it's available on the delivery domain. On the right side, you see the JSON you get if you call the metadata format. The metadata from Dynamic Media with OpenAPI call. And it's quite limited. Basically, you have the dimension on the top, on the bottom of the JSON with width and height. You have on the top DC format, you have the MIME type. And if smart cropping is enabled, so if this asset is stored in a folder with an image policy, image profile assigned with smart cropping enabled, then you also get a list, I've shown only one here, of named smart croppings with the cropping coordinates which were detected by the AI. This metadata does not include stuff like title, description, licensing information. If you need this, you have to do the same call with authentication, so with an IMS BIRA token attached, which makes it a bit cumbersome to get to this data. If you want to call it from an environment where you do not have this token easily available, you then have to configure it and get it and so on to get the full metadata. And now smart cropping. For me, this was always an USP of Dynamic Media Classic and also of the new Dynamic Media with OpenAPI. On the right side, you see a screenshot of the image profile. And this is a specific profile for Dynamic Media. In this case, for enabling smart crop. So basically, I've listed here 5 different aspect ratios, square, landscape, and so on, which I want to use in my application in different scenarios for my assets. I have to enter actual resolution values here, 100 pixel and so on, but this is not the resolution you have to request. It's just, I use it just to define the aspect ratio. I can get renditions in any resolution I want in the different use cases from it. And on the left side, I have an example. On the left side is the original image. The middle is a cropping to square, and in the right, it's a cropping to a portrait mode. And you see, this is what you get from the AI. It's not just the center cropping, but it's really a cropping getting the best portion of the image without any manual intervention. And in most cases, the AI does it just right, and you can just accept it. But of course, you have the possibility, I will show it quickly in the demo later, how to adjust this area. And this is, I already showed a couple of this 2 years ago in a talk, no, 3 years ago about classic Dynamic Media, and this is also usable with the new Dynamic Media, but much better integrated and much nicer way from API-wise. So, and you have also heard it from Georg, there's this asset selector thing. So if you happen to have separated your assets from your sites instance, maybe one or multiple assets instances, you can use the asset selector in your AEM sites instance to pick references to remote assets from one or multiple remote asset instances. And then you get the selector, you can do a full text search, you can filter by certain stuff and uses. It's also possible to use this as a selector from external application because it's just a micro frontend. You can deploy it everywhere and use it in your custom applications which need reference to pick references. But it's also integrated in AEM sites. There's one limitation in the asset selector. So if you happen to have a very nicely and well thought out folder structures for your asset on your asset servers, this is nice, but you cannot use it in the asset selector. Although the asset selector supports browsing folders, Dynamic Media with OpenAPI, which is also the base for the selector to fill the query list, currently does not support it. So in Dynamic Media with OpenAPI, internally, all assets are just a big flat list. You can filter them, you can search them, and so on, using tags, etc. But you cannot just browse through the folders. This is a bit unhappy from my point of view. Maybe this will be made possible in the future, I'm not sure. So these are limitations from my point of view currently. So smart crop for images working great. Smart cropping for videos, which is supported by the classic Dynamic Media, is currently not supported for the media with OpenAPI. And currently, this OpenAPI version only supports a limited set of image modifiers, basically the 6-7 I have showed on the previous screen. And amongst others, image presets are currently not supported. So for example, image preset is a possibility to replace a long list of image modifiers with just a single preset URL parameter, and it's defined behind the scenes what modifiers these are. But those two features marked with an asterisk should become soon, I've seen in the slides, so probably even this year or early next year. Let's see. And I already told it, in the asset selector, you cannot browse folders currently on your remote asset instance. Yeah, with this, let's look how we can actually use the media API in AEM, in your AEM components. First, if you're only using core components, once you have this configured, this involves setting a couple of environment variables which trigger a couple of OSGI configurations. And once this is in place, you can, the image edit dialog changes a bit. This pick link has a different behavior. You can choose between local, which opens the classic AEM local asset pick dialog, and remote. And this remote opens the asset selector, and then you can pick remote references. This works nicely. You can also pick name smart croppings if they are configured and so on. But there are also some limitations in the current implementation. So currently, the core components only support remote assets. So currently, it's not possible with core components to use Dynamic Media with OpenAPI for assets stored in the same instance as the pages. Okay, you could configure your local instance as remote asset repository, but then the label pick remote doesn't really make sense for the users. And it only supports images with all renditions, smart cropping, but no downloads. So for example, in the download component, you cannot select a PDF from the media with OpenAPI. It can only pick local PDFs. SVGs are currently not supported. Of course, for SVG, it's not that important to have the media, but if you have stored them central in remote asset instance, still would be interesting to pick them. And you can only configure one single remote asset repository. What does it mean? So we have one AEMaaCS instance and probably multiple remote asset repositories. This is technically possible with asset selector and so on, but the core components and the way it's currently configured in AEM itself, currently configuration-wise, support only one hardwired remote asset repository. So currently, you can only pick from one remote asset instance, which is probably most cases fine. But there's another limitation to having multiple asset repositories in the future, because below I've shown the notation that is currently used by core components to store references to remote assets. It's basically a string starting with a special prefix and the UID and then the SEO name for the image. So in case you activate multiple remote asset repositories, which is possible in the asset selector via configuration, also a bit hacky, then it will not work with the notation, because notation then had to include a reference to repository 1, 2, or whatever repository you've chosen as well. So for this notation has to be changed as well. I think this would not be a big issue to add it to core components and do these changes, but currently it's not there. And so this is the current situation. But for most use cases, it's probably fine to use right away. Yeah, and now coming to the media handler and how to use it with the media with OpenAPI. First, difficult question, what's this WCMO media handler? And it's a question that fill in itself a long talk, and I already did some talks on it in recent years. I've also linked them in the references screen, so I keep it very short what it is. Media handler is a capability for a very easy way to add the aspect of image or in general asset handling to your AEM components. Because if you're using core components and implement some additional custom components, which you also want to support images in your own teaser, for example, or whatever, then the only way to add this capability is by embedding the core image component, which works. It's done by core components itself as well, but it's cumbersome and has some limited flexibility. And with Media Handler, this is much more flexible. You have an API, and Java API, and also other means how you just can add this aspect to your core components and can use any imaging features right away in a much more easier and flexible way. So the Media Handler uses a centralized way to a declarative way to define your asset handling. So per application, you can define, okay, I want to handle all my assets this way and that way, and use a couple of media formats, different aspect ratios I want to use, and then use this definitions in all your components. And we have transparent supports for all 4 ways I've shown initially of generating renditions in your application with AEM, JVM-based, web-optimized, image delivery, dynamic media, old and new way. And very important, you can transparently switch between those. So for example, with one project, if you deploy it to a cloud instance, you're using, for example, web-optimized image delivery or dynamic media with OpenAPI. And if you deploy the same code, the same configuration locally to your SDK instance, it automatically falls back to JVM-based renditions because those other 2 are not available for local SDK instances and still have the same code and same configuration. And of course, it's fully compatible with core components. We also provide a thin layer from WCMO above the core components, which just add these aspects for image and also URL and link handling to all core components without any change in behavior. So you can use it as drop-in replacement if you want. Yeah, just a quick about our media format concept. So basically, Media Handler, we assign to each component one aspect ratio. You can do more complex, in most cases, just an aspect ratio, or even multiple ones. So you can say you have a teaser component, and depending on the responsive behavior on the screen size, mobile, tablet, desktop, different aspect ratios are automatically chosen and rendered. And this is, for example, something which is also not possible with core components easily. Of course, you could do this on the client side and only showing portions of the image, but then you have, for example, no smart cropping because you need to request really different rendition from the different aspect ratios to get the smart cropping support. I will show this quickly in a demo. So I'm using the weak example, but with Media Handler enabled. Oh, it's wrong browser. Just switching here. So I will just go to this page. And we have, it's loaded. We have just this hero teaser here, and it's using a responsive image component from WCMO. And when I enable responsive behavior and looking at phone mode, I get a nearly square view. And this is currently using image without smart cropping. It's just using center cropping without any. So those 2 views are nice, but the third view, the big landscape view, is not really nice because the climber here is cut off in half, only his leg is visible, not really nice. So I will now switch to the same image in a different folder locally on this sites instance, which enables smart cropping without any manual intervention. Let's see how this looks. I'm picking this image here. And now we see automatically this big landscape version is looking fine. The climber is visible, the belay are not, but it's not possible in this landscape view. Then we have this version, it's looking nice. But the small version, here the AI did not do the best job. The climber is visible, but the belayer is cut in half. So this is a use case where we want to intervene manually to make this visible. So I'm going to my asset folder and going to smart crop, and I see automatically which portions the AI automatically chosen. It mostly looks nice, but in this case, I want to change it. I can just drag it here and pick a nicer version, hit on save, And then this new portion of the image is selected automatically and will get live instantly. Well, not instantly, because there's CDN TTL of 10 minutes, which is too long for this talk, because I've prepared a second image where I already did the change here in smart cropping, and which is already in the CDN cache. But it's nearly instantly because CDN just takes 10 minutes. And then going back here, picking my other image 2. And now we see it's looking nicely, our different selection, and those other two are still the default selected version. So this is very nice for if you have a huge number of assets which you do crop a lot to, in most cases, get a much better view than you have if you're just doing the center cropping. Okay, finalizing this with a feature comparison. So if you want to use the Media with OpenAPI in your components, then you have these possibilities. If you're using remote assets, you can use Media Handler or core components out of the box. If you want it to use for local assets stored on your sites instance, then it's much easier with Media Handler because we support both, also in combination. We are also doing a reference validation. So if you have a remote asset, you do not really know from the asset, from the reference itself, if it's still valid. Maybe the approval was revoked, or the asset has a dimension which is not big enough to get the rendition size you want. So we do a server-side call to the metadata before rendering the markup and before this page is cached, and check that the asset is still available, and check that the resolution is big enough. Smart cropping is possible in both, but we have a bit different approach. So Media Handler automatically picks this best smart cropping available for the aspect ratio you have configured. In core components, you have to manually pick one of the available smart croppings for each instance where you use the asset. So it's just a different approach. And SVG images and non-image assets only support of Media Handler currently. And the limitation about the multiple repositories, we have the same currently, because currently we stick to the same notation and configuration as it's used by core components to be fully compatible here. So as soon as this changes in core components, hopefully this will change in the future, we will pick up this as well. If there's a request from the community to implement it earlier, to have multiple repositories, we of course can also find our own way. It's not a big change, we just do not want to come with our own invention for another notation here. Yeah, that's all from my talk. A big list of references to all this Adobe documentation, to Media Handler documentation, and also to recent talks about this topic. So, thank you.
We're a bit in overtime, but I still have time for some question. In AEM, when you publish a page, referenced assets are replicated by default as well. So how does this work with the approved flag? It will be a tedious task to flag each asset one by one.
Yeah, of course you can do bulk metadata, bulk property editing for assets to, approving a lot of assets at once, especially if you enabled it first time. But yeah, this automatic replication on activating a page is probably still happening. In Media Handler, we currently only display assets in the preview view which are already approved. So you see it already as alpha that you only publish assets which are approved. There's, I think, currently no possibility or no way in AEM to automatically approve an asset if you publish a page. So it's really distinct currently.
There's another question about the approved flag. Mm-hmm. How does the approved flag work together with updates on metadata or new renditions and so on? Do you have to reset it while the updates are happening, or
no.
What happens to the URL?
Once it's approved, all changes you are doing to your asset, like adding new renditions, okay, this is a special case everywhere, but probably changing metadata, should be reflected automatically on the delivery domain as well, probably with this 10 minutes TTL level, but it should be available immediately once it's approved. Yeah. So you have really to think different than the traditional publishing of assets. It's really a live view of your assets stored in the author instance. Okay, it's not stored there, it's stored in the bucket and so on, and cloud services. But mentally, it's really just a view on your assets stored in the author. And once it is approved, all changes are reflected immediately on the live delivery domain as well.
Question about asset protection. Is there a way to protect assets when using the assets outside AEM pages? So for example, only authorized customers can access some assets by an external app, for example.
I have not tested it myself, but Georg mentioned it in his talk. There's a possibility to set certain configurations, so only with a certain AEMaaCS BIRA token configuration you can access certain assets, but I have not tested this myself. But there are ways to do it, yeah.
Last and final question, probably it's, I don't know, you can answer it, it's more like a licensing thing. Will customer with existing dynamic media license be able to use dynamic media with OpenAPI support?
So to my knowledge, it's exactly the same license. So if you have dynamic media license, you can also use dynamic media with OpenAPI, to my knowledge.
All right. Thank you, Stefan. Big applause for Stefan Seifert.